All right. Welcome, welcome, welcome to Healthy Tuesdays with Community Care Development Network. I am Tamika Holmes, the director, and as you know, we bring Healthy Tuesdays to you each week to provide you with healthy solutions, especially during this climate of pandemic. And so we have today with us Ms. Ashley Blackwell, who is a trainee with the Maternal and Child Health program at UAB Pediatrics. And she is here to share with you some key components on how to remain nutritious during the pandemic. So just sit back, relax, and I am going to turn it over to you, Ashley.
Thank you so much, Ms. Holmes. I'm excited to be here and happy Healthy Tuesday, everyone. So let's jump in. I've got a short presentation that we will go through, and let me begin sharing my screen with everyone. Okay, we will be talking about nutrition labels and how to read the label for better health. So if you are anything like me, we've been in a pandemic for a little while now, and we're probably all exploring new ways to feed ourselves at home. Either feeding ourselves, we're living alone, trying to figure out new ways and new things to eat in community in very new ways. And then some of us are also feeding families. So we're learning how to do that a little bit differently as well, and with a few more hurdles maybe than we've had previously. So something I want to talk about is, while we're making any meal for ourselves or others, how we can have a few tools in our toolbox when we're looking at foods in a convenience store, a grocery store, wherever it is that we're purchasing food. I would love to give everyone a few tools to look at when they're purchasing things to make the wisest choice to keep you on track with your own health goals for you and those you love. The main tool is the nutrition label. So we're going to talk about that. Our goals for today is to be able to find a few items on a nutrition label. So the first thing we want to be able to identify is the serving size. We want to be able to identify how many calories are in a serving. We want to know the nutrients that we need to limit. So this will include certain kinds of fat, sodium, and added sugars. And then we're also going to talk about some nutrients that we may want to get more of, or just make sure we're getting an adequate amount of those. And so those will include vitamin D, calcium, and potassium. Just so we know exactly what we're talking about, this is a nutrition facts panel or nutrition facts label. It'll be found on most items that we get through a grocery store, a convenience store, anything that is sold in these types of environments. You won't find this typically on like fresh produce or fresh vegetables. They're not on there, but anything in a box or a can or a bag, you're gonna find one of these nutrition facts label, and they are an excellent tool to glance over and know if this is gonna be a great choice for you and your family, or if this is something maybe we wanna pass on. It's a great option to look at for comparing foods. It doesn't tell you what to eat, but it does give you some keys to helping make great choices when we are buying foods and choosing foods. So at first glance, the very first thing that we want to look at is going to be the serving size. Now, some items, the serving size is the whole thing. So that would be things like maybe a bottle of Coke or a small can of something, or an individual bag of chips or crackers. Those typically, the serving size is just one. It is the item that you're holding. That's the whole thing. However, lots of other products are going to have a different serving size, meaning they have multiple serving sizes in the same container. So that's going to be the very first thing we want to look at. And it'll be at the very top of the nutrition label. It's in bold, and it will say serving size and how much. Now, what we'll think about next is, how much do you plan to eat? Are we going to be eating 2 servings of this item? In which case we would need to make sure that we're going to double all of the numbers beneath that. So it would double the calories, it would double the sodium, the carbs, the protein if we were eating 2. So one example is if you had a large bag of pretzels and the serving size was 10 pretzels and you planned on eating 20, we would need to double all of the other numbers as well. The very next thing on the label that we would probably want to direct our eyes to is going to be the calories that are in that food. So the calories also is going to be in the biggest letters, very bold, and it'll say the number of calories. Again, this is going to be in 1 serving. So if we're eating 2, we're going to double that calorie number. Now, calories sometimes have a bad reputation. We say that word a lot of times like it's a bad thing sometimes. But calories are very important because they are just a measure of energy. Now, we want to treat that with some respect and have boundaries around that and know how much energy an individual needs. But they are just a measure of energy, and our body cannot work without energy. We need it for our work, our play, our brain function. We need the energy to do all the things we have to do every day right now. So what we want to make sure of is that we know about how many calories we want for the day for you as an individual. And then that's the number we want to stay around. If we're consistently going over that calorie amount, our body will start to store that as fat cells. And that obviously can have some long-term consequences and be less healthy if we start getting to an unhealthy weight. But in general, calories are just what keep our body running. So we want to look at those, know how much we're taking in, maintain our own caloric intake goals, and then we can go from there. So that's what we'll look at first, is serving size and then calories, so we can pay attention to how many calories we're actually eating. Just to give a quick reference, when we're thinking calories, sometimes it's hard and labels will say low calorie, or they'll have a lot of different signifiers on the label to try and really pull people in. So something to keep in mind is, again, if you're looking at 1 serving of a product, if it's offering calories like 70 to 80 calories, we could consider that a low calorie item. So if you're watching your amount of calories and wanting to keep that lower, then those items would be a great option. If you're looking and it has 100 to 150 calories per serving, that's a moderate amount. And then high calorie items are things with 400 or more in 1 serving. So that would be something we would consider a high calorie food. Another thing we want to pay attention to are nutrition label components. And I'm going to move my video over, everyone. So there's 2 types of nutrition components. These are macronutrients and micronutrients. At the very top of the nutrition facts panel, there's going to be the macronutrients listed. These are the things that give us the energy, the calories. That's going to include your carbohydrates, your fat, and your protein. Those all give our body energy, and they're considered macronutrients because we need them in larger quantities. These are what provide our calories and our energy. Now, at the bottom of the nutrition label, it's going to be after a nice big bold line. That's going to be listing our micronutrients. Micro meaning smaller. We need these in smaller quantities. They're not less important. We just need a little less of them because they're very small. This is going to typically include our vitamins and our minerals. Again, they're very important for the function of our body, and we'll talk a little more about a few of them in a moment. So next, let's talk, we're going to split our sections here into things we want to limit and things we want to make sure we're getting enough of. So the items we want to talk about limiting are going to be certain kinds of fat, sodium, and added sugars. Now, you'll notice this is an older nutrition facts panel, so it's not going to look exactly like the ones we were just discussing, but I wanted us to see the highlighted area for fat and sodium, and then below that, a little ways down there, sugars. And what we're specifically going to talk about is added sugar. So I'll get to that in a moment. And then again, past that big bold line kind of in the middle there, we're going to see the micronutrients at the bottom. These are our vitamins and minerals. So limiting certain kinds of fat. Let's talk about the kinds of fat. There's going to be a lot of things listed, and there's a lot of variety of fats out there, and that's important to note that they are different. So when we see on a label total fat, that's the fat contained in one serving of a product from all sources of fat that are found in that item. Beverage, a drink, it could be a food, it's any fat found in that item. Saturated fat, now this we want to keep to less than 10% of our daily calories. So if you're on a 2,000 calorie per day diet, this would be 200 calories is about how much we would want to max out for our saturated fat. Staying below that is even better, but that's sort of the max we want to hit, or that's where we would want to cap things. Now, saturated fat is the one that can be bad for some heart health, our blood health. These are the ones that have a little bit harder time getting through our veins and our arteries. And so we want to keep that amount very low. The next kind of fat that people may have heard of and is still listed on a label is trans fats. These were added to a lot of shelf-stable items in order to make them last longer, but science has discovered that they're very bad for our health. So many manufacturers have had to just get rid of them completely. Most likely your label will say there is 0 trans fat, but it is required to be on the label. So if you do see that it has some trans fat in it, it may be better to choose another item. Most likely those have been phased out from the products you're consuming. Finally, cholesterol is listed on the label. Eaten in moderation, it's no longer considered a danger to heart health. Again, we don't want to go over on cholesterol. We can still look for the items if we're comparing to choose the item that has less cholesterol is a great idea, but that is not one of the main burdens towards heart health. Now, if a label says the item has less than 10% of your daily value from fat or saturated fat, that's going to generally be a wise choice. On the side column is where you find your daily values. We'll notice that beside each nutrient, there's going to be 2 measurements. One is how much there is, usually in grams or milligrams. But because those are a little hard for us maybe to wrap our minds around, it also gives a percentage. So we'll talk more about those percentages of daily values in a moment also. But when we're looking at fat, if it has less than 10% daily value from saturated fat, that probably is a wise choice. The next item we will look at limiting is our sodium. Now, our body needs sodium, but it's found naturally in a lot of fruits, vegetables, even whole grain products. There's a little bit found there naturally. Where our trouble gets into is in a lot of packaged products that often have some added salt or added sodium, either for flavoring or for making it shelf stable for longer. Now, the goal for most individuals is going to be keeping your sodium to 2,300 milligrams per day. If your doctor recommends differently than that or lower than that, you will want to follow your doctor's recommendations. Some tips on how to restrict our sodium is going to be eating less prepackaged foods and instead focusing our diet on fresh, frozen, and canned fruits and vegetables, eating a lot of whole grains and low-fat dairy options, because these will have less of that added sodium that really adds up. Having high sodium can put us at risk for heart disease, high blood pressure, kidney disease. So these are some things that we want to obviously avoid, and so we're going to limit our sodium intake as much as possible. As a general rule, foods that have less than 250 milligrams of sodium are going to be considered healthy. So when we're looking again at that first measurement it gives by sodium, that's telling us milligrams. So if we're looking at this nutrition facts panel, you'll see I've circled sodium is 160. That's less than 250, and so this might be a great choice. We would want to keep in mind, though, if we were having 2 servings of this item, that's going to double that sodium. So something to keep in mind. Last item, we're going to talk about limiting our added sugars. Again, many foods have natural sugars in them, such as fruits, vegetables have a little, even milk has a form of sugar in it. So those come naturally, and we're not going to worry about those as much. What we're worried about more is going to be the added sugars. So in an item here, we will look at below the total sugar count. We'll notice on this particular label, total sugars are 12 grams, but 10 grams of that is added. And so the amount that's given here is going to be giving 20% of calories and an average 2,000 calorie diet. That's what this label is offering. What we want to look for is if a product has less than 10% from sugar, it would be a wise choice. So in terms of sugars, the label we're looking at here may not be our best choice. So we may compare it with a similar item and see if that one maybe has less than 10% of our daily value from added sugar. So that might be one we would want to compare. Again, what we're focusing on just now was things to limit. That was saturated fats, sugars, added sugar, and sodium. Now we're going to look below that dark line and look at things we want to get more of. So again, for us, we want to look at vitamin D, calcium, and potassium. Those are going to be some of the items that you'll see on current labels. Remember, the label I showed you with the color blocks is an old version. Now, the dietary guidelines for Americans suggest that most Americans don't get enough of these nutrients. So that's the ones that you're going to see limited or noted on our nutrition label. Vitamin D, it's helpful in bone health and potentially helpful in many chronic diseases. It's even potentially been associated with symptoms of depression and anxiety when there's a low vitamin D intake. So we want to pay attention to an item that has a lot of vitamin D in it, may be a great choice. And a lot of products either have vitamin D added to them, or especially dairy products might have a great source of vitamin D as well because it's added to those often. Now, calcium is another one, and this is helpful in bone, nervous system, and blood health. And potassium, it's helpful for regulating blood pressure, your heart rhythm, muscle work, and even nerve impulses. So these are things that it has been found many Americans do not get enough of. So we're going to focus on that lower part of the nutrition label as well and see if the products we're buying and eating, we want to make sure they are a good source of some of these nutrients as well. Now, like we said, there's two types of measuring for each nutrient that's listed on our nutrition facts panel. The first one is going to be typically a grams, milligram. If there's difficulty wrapping our minds around that, which there is for me, what we can look at next is going to be that percent of daily value. Now, these are based off of an average caloric intake that a person might have, which is going to be around 2,000 calories. Some may be needing less, some may be needing more, but an average is about 2,000. And so when we're looking at this, we want to look at that percentage because that makes everything, we don't have to worry about the grams and the milligrams and thinking in these tiny measurements. Instead, we can be thinking, how much does this give us towards our daily goal? So when we're looking at these, something to keep in mind is that 5% or less is going to be low in whatever that specific nutrient is. 20% or more would be considered high in whatever that nutrient is. So remember, the items we wanted to limit at the top were the fat, added sugar, and sodium. So we want to maybe aim for products that for a serving are less than 5 because we want to limit them. So we want to choose options that are low in those. Now for the bottom of the thing with the vitamins and the minerals, and even as we're keeping an eye on protein, which we didn't discuss, but if you're counting up your protein, you can pay attention to that. We would want to look for 20% or higher, especially looking at those vitamins and minerals to make sure we're getting enough. Because for those, we want to reach that 100% per day. We won't all do it perfectly every day, but when we're looking at those, our goal might be to try and reach 100% of our goal. Whereas with the top ones, saturated fat, added sugar, sodium, we're not trying to reach 100%. Keeping it lower is better. So that's one way to think through if you're counting out, maybe paying more attention to the percentages. That may be an easier way to think through how we get to or stay beneath 100% in those items. Something that's a great takeaway to remember about nutrition labels is that they don't tell us what to eat. They just help us compare products so that we can make healthy choices for our nutrition goals. Everyone is living their life right now. We're all trying to stay as healthy as we can, feed those around us in community as best as we can. And so I'm hoping that by reading the nutrition labels, knowing things to try and limit, looking at things we want to get enough of, and then being able to check on those serving size and calorie goals, hopefully we'll be able to make wise choices especially when the grocery store shelves are really hit and miss right now. I know we're trying a lot of new products in my life because it's what's there. And so hopefully this will give a few quick references. So when you're having to choose a new product or a new food group, this maybe will give you a tool to use in making the best choice for your personal health goals. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Ms. Holmes.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much for all of that great information on nutrition and health, and a lot of the nutrition facts that are on a label. I've recently had to make some adjustments in the last few years to my diet because I found out I have a gluten allergy. And so when I first found out I had this allergy, grocery shopping for me was like 4 hours because you have to read everything on the back of a label, and you would be surprised what you would find gluten in. Everything from seasonings to salad dressings to, and so I really had to adjust to that lifestyle. And so for me, eating in the midst of a pandemic hasn't been too challenging because I've adjusted my diet already. But we do have families who are spending so much more time at home that, where they might have provided, breakfast before the kids go to school or dinner only at night. Now they're having to fill in the time gaps on what do I feed my children, or, what am I going to eat myself because I don't have my coworkers to bounce ideas off of, or I used to go out with a coworker and now I'm not in a position where I can even discuss meals on, what I'm going to eat. And so that is a wealth of information. And when you were speaking about the vitamin D levels and the calcium levels, that is so important because I found out, and this was a study that I was reading, that vitamin D levels can also, if they're low enough, it can make you very forgetful. Like it could just really mess with your memory and things like that. And so it has been linked to Alzheimer's patients, them having very low vitamin D levels. And it's not as simple as let me go outside and get some sun, because Alabama is considered a green state and we've got a lot of tree coverage here in Alabama. And so we don't get opportunities to soak up as much sun, let's say like a Florida or a California, where they have a lot more exposure to the sun. So that is really good ways for us to think about getting more vitamin D, more calcium in our diet, and taking a look at our salt intakes. The African American Society love our salt. I'm going to tell you, we eat salt in everything, on everything. And so if you live in a area where you eat in a lot of pork products and even how we cook our vegetables, I think that there has been some changes from what I've noticed, but I still have some old school families that's gonna go get the ham hock and the pig knuckles and things like that to season their greens with. But this is good information for us to know, especially with processed foods and things that come out of a can, and so you can make the best choice as possible. So if you choose to season your meat with a ham hock, you can look at the back of a can and say, okay, I'm not going to eat this. You can make some substitutions there. I do have a couple of questions that I would like to bring up. What are some of the things that you guys are noticing from being on the dietary end of have y'all run into any conversations or challenges during the pandemic for just individuals, youth, families? Have y'all run into anything that has been a challenge in the dietary area for families?
Certainly one of the food systems that got knocked out completely with the pandemic was school meals for kids.
Mhm.
And it just, because of the pandemic, if schools shut down, that source of food for many, many children across not just our state, but really the nation, that food source was taken away really quickly.
Mhm.
And I, knowing a few child nutrition program directors and others in communities, got very creative very fast
Oh,
with
wow.
how to get meals to kids and families. And so I think that was a big one that we saw. And I've just seen some excellent creativity again, delivery by school buses, being able to drop off
Mhm.
food supplies for a whole day, really for anyone under the age of 18, regardless of what schools they went to in some cases,
Mhm.
or whether they were enrolled in a school in many cases. And we're able to drop off breakfast, a snack, and a lunch. So pretty much what they would potentially be able to get at school and with an after school care program.
Mhm.
So that was one thing that we certainly saw a quick change in. And then we saw some really creative work to get meals to those families and students and children who needed them. Another one that is more personal level and just talking with people is the how do I cook at home? Many people don't really cook at home quite as often as maybe we've had to.
Yeah.
So people have been learning skills. Typical emails that I would read all of a sudden had cooking tips in them that never talked about food before, because it was just something everybody sort of had to step up to the plate and jump into. And so that was an interesting conversation of how, as the dietetic and nutrition community, how can we help people have one less stress factor?
Mhm.
We all had enough going on, still do with the pandemic, but how can the nutrition and dietetics community really serve not just our patients and clients, but the broader community at large via social media or Healthy Tuesdays, things like that? How can we make one less stressor by ideas for healthy, simple meals? So I've seen a lot of that going out from other nutrition colleagues, and it's been helpful for me. And I love cooking. Clearly, I love food. So that it comes natural to me, but the amount of cooking and food thoughts even I had sort of escalated. I have 3 children. And so when they were all home with me, I was like, I don't cook quite this much normally. And so we all had to step up a little, and the sharing of ideas on social media for how to make that a little bit easier was very helpful.
That's really awesome. And then when you have, multiple kids with different taste buds and eating personalities, one kid may want this and the other kid may want that. And so I
Absolutely.
totally understand. That too has been a challenge that we have found with kids being at home more, and then especially kids who are old enough to be at home by themselves. How can we help get food to the families? Parents still have to work, or in some cases, parents are still working at home, and they may have to, plan accordingly to where they can have the food set up to where that young one or the person that's young enough or yet responsible enough to fix their own meal have those things set up for the youth. So our food program picked up quite a bit. I think June was our highest month where we served about 350 families, support between 350 and 400 families in June. But, when everything was happening, we were getting calls, from everybody from grandparents to parents. And then the how do you cook and what do you cook? Those were questions that would come across our table as well. And so we can concur when we say, yeah, it's out there. And so my kids are adults, so I don't have as much of that to deal with because I have enough difficulty figuring out what I'm going to eat.
Yes.
But, by them being adults, it makes it a little bit more easier on me. But I feel for parents that have kids at home that they're still trying to navigate this thing. So what are your last nuggets, I guess, before we convene for the day?
Yeah. Well, I think you triggered a thought when you were talking about how do we put together a meal or a snack for people, whether it's children or ourselves. And something that's really helpful to remember, so we know the food groups, right? We have fruits, vegetables, we have starches, that's like our breads, our pastas, even potatoes, corn, and peas. Those are in a starch.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have dairy, and we have protein foods.
Mm-hmm.
That would be our meats, beans, even like nut butters, peanut butter, those things. So those are our 5 food groups. And something to think through, mostly for getting variety in your meals and in your snacks, is to pick 3 food groups for every meal and at least 2 food groups for each snack. So if you had a snack of an apple and a mozzarella cheese stick, love it. That's 2 food groups. So, and then at dinner time or a meal time, breakfast, lunch, dinner, you can aim for a protein, a starch, and a fruit or a vegetable. Obviously, adding other food groups is okay as well, but living kind of by that sort of standard of at least 3 at a meal and at least 2 at every snack from those food groups is going to really help our bodies get the variety of foods and nutrients that we need. So you mentioned just kind of how to put together meals, and that just made me think of that. And it's really helpful for me, even feeding myself, as if I look at a plate and all I have is starch. I'm like, look around my kitchen real quick. Where's a protein I can throw on my plate? And so it helps us make sure we're eating enough variety to keep our bodies healthy. So that's a quick check that I kind of do on my plate every day for things. And so maybe that's a helpful quick check for y'all as well.
That's awesome. I like that. So 3 of the food groups for every meal, and then 2 of the food groups for a snack.
Mm-hmm.
Start following that myself, because I just, I tend to be a little bit of a workaholic, and I've here recently got into the bad habit of not eating lunch and working through lunch. So I need to stop doing that. I can admit it. I do it. So I'm going to stop.
We all do it sometimes. We all do it sometimes.
Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us. This wealth of knowledge on how we can eat better and do better during this trying time. And I encourage, our families and our audience not to just follow these things because we're in a pandemic. I know we can't wait to get back to some sort of normalcy, but don't go crazy, y'all, at restaurants. Whatever great habits you pick up during this time, continue to follow them. Thanks so much, Ashley, for spending this time with us. We will see you next time. We're definitely inviting you back to speak. So be
well,
ready
thank you
for
so
it.
much. I was happy to be here.
Awesome. Thanks again. And that is our Healthy Tuesday. See you guys next Tuesday.